I run the Kangpe, he said, the words falling into the opulent silence of his penthouse, like stones into a deep well. The largest syndicate in this city, what you would call the Korean Mafia. Ilara stared at him, the crystal glass of water cold against her trembling fingers. The city lights glittered 1,000 feet below, a galaxy of oblivious souls, a world away from the confession hanging in the air between them. Julian Kang stood before her, not as the intense, impossibly gentle man who had pursued her with a singular, unnerving focus, but as a king, confessing to a throne built on darkness. His bespoke suit, the one that probably cost more than her entire year's rent, suddenly seemed less like a symbol of wealth and more like armor. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. She knew what it meant, the hushed phone calls, the way men twice his age bowed their heads when he entered a room, the shadow of his driver, Min Chun, a silent, watchful hawk always in the periphery. She knew, but she needed to hear it from him. His jaw, usually so firm, tightened. A faint silvery scar along its edge seemed to pulsate under the low light. "It means my family's business is built on things that would break you, Ilara. Extortion, violence, control. We don't build things, we take them." The confession wasn't an apology. It was a statement of fact, as brutal and unadorned as the man himself. He took a step closer, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch, a brand against her skin. "I wanted you to know," he continued, his voice dropping to a low, raw murmur that vibrated through her. "Before this goes any further, I wanted you to have the choice." A choice. He called it a choice. It felt like an execution, the end of the beautiful, impossible dream she had allowed herself to fall into, the end of the feeling of safety she had only ever found in the arms of the most dangerous man she would ever meet. Her heart, which had been doing a frantic, hopeful dance for weeks, splintered. "A choice to what?" she managed, the words sharp as broken glass. "To look the other way? To be the gangster's girl who wears diamonds bought with someone else's pain?" He flinched. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but she saw it. A crack in the marble facade. For the first time since she'd met him, Julian Kang looked lost. "No," he said, the single word hoarse with an emotion she couldn't name. "A choice to leave. To run as far away from me as you can, and never look back." 3 months earlier, Ilara Vance's world was a cramped 2-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of her roommate's burnt toast and the exhaust fumes from the street below. Her life was a frantic cycle of shifts. The morning rush at a downtown coffee shop where she pulled espressos for bankers who never made eye contact, and the evening grind at a noisy bistro where she balanced trays of pasta and dodged handsy patrons. Sleep was a luxury, and her bank account was a constant low-grade hum of anxiety. Her dream was a small studio, a space to fill with canvases and the smell of turpentine, a place where she could finally paint the city as she saw it, not as glittering towers, but as a beautiful, bruised survivor. But art supplies cost money, and money was a river she was constantly trying to cup in her hands. "Another catering gig?" Maya asked, perched on the arm of their lumpy sofa, scrolling through her phone. Maya was Ilara's anchor, a whirlwind of optimism and brightly dyed hair who believed in Ilara's art more than Ilara sometimes did. Ilara nodded, pinning a stray curl back from her face. She was already in her drab, all-black uniform. "The pay is triple time. It's at the Apex Tower, some kind of corporate merger party." She sighed, tugging at the stiff collar. "It'll cover the new canvases, at least." "Apex Tower? Ooh, fancy," Maya said, her eyes widening. "Maybe you'll meet a handsome billionaire who will sweep you off your feet and become your personal art patron." Ilara snorted, a dry, tired sound. "More likely I'll get mistaken for the coat check girl, and someone will hand me a fur that's worth more than my life. She grabbed her keys. Wish me luck. Hope I don't spill champagne on anyone important. You won't, Maya called after her. You're too graceful. Now go get that canvas money. The Apex Tower was less a building and more a monument to obscene wealth. The party was on the 98th floor, in a private club that looked out over the entire glittering expanse of the city. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low murmur of powerful people making powerful deals. Elara felt like a ghost, a functional shadow moving through a world she didn't belong to, her tray of canapes the only reason for her existence. Meanwhile, in a glass-walled conference room 2 floors above, Julian Kang concluded a different kind of merger. It was less a negotiation and more a quiet, brutal absorption. The man across the table, the head of a smaller rival faction, was sweating, his face pale. The terms are not up for discussion, Mr. Tanaka, Julian said, his voice quiet, almost gentle, which made it all the more terrifying. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence was a weapon in itself. My father was a man of theatrical gestures. I prefer efficiency. Min Jun, his second in command, stood by the door, impassive as a statue, but radiating a coiled energy that promised swift, decisive violence if needed. Tanaka signed the papers, his hand shaking. He was handing over decades of territory and revenue streams. He was handing over his power. Julian gave a curt nod. The meeting was over. My father will not be pleased, Min-jun said in Korean as they rode the private elevator down to the party. He enjoyed the theatrics. My father enjoys the past, Julian replied, adjusting his cuffs. I am concerned with the future. But his own words felt hollow. The future stretched before him, a sterile landscape of more meetings, more takeovers, more lonely nights in his penthouse that felt more like a pristine cage than a home. He was 32 years old, the undisputed heir to a dark throne, and he had never felt more empty. He was attending this party only as a duty, a show of the Kang family's consolidated power. He stepped out into the throng of people, his face a mask of cool indifference. He took a glass of whiskey from a passing tray without a glance at the server. The noise, the false laughter, the grasping ambition, it all washed over him, leaving him untouched, isolated in the center of the crowd. He felt a familiar, crushing loneliness settle over him. And then he saw her. She wasn't laughing or schmoozing. She was standing near a service corridor, her back straight, her shoulders squared. A group of young men in ill-fitting suits, drunk on champagne and their own perceived importance, had cornered her. Hey, service, one of them slurred, snapping his fingers an inch from her face. Our glasses are empty. Are you just going to stand there? Elara didn't flinch. Her expression remained neutral, but Julian, a master at reading the subtle tells of men far more dangerous than these boys, saw the flicker in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It was fire, a deep, banked ember of defiance. She held her empty tray like a shield. My apologies, she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through his drunken haze. I'll find your server for you. You are the server, another one sneered. Now get us some more champagne, sweetheart. It was a small, ugly moment, the kind that happened 1,000 times a day in this city. A casual cruelty born of privilege. But for Julian, watching from across the room, the world went silent. The music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull roar. All he could see was her, the proud set of her jaw, the way she held her ground, a small island of integrity in an ocean of arrogance. She wasn't conventionally beautiful like the other women in the room, draped in silk and jewels. She was something far more potent. She was real. Something inside him, a tectonic plate deep within his soul that had been dormant for his entire life, shifted. It was not desire, not in the simple, fleeting way he had known it. It was a sudden, violent recognition, a sense of finding something he hadn't even known he was searching for. He started moving before he was even aware of making a decision. He didn't stride, he glided, a panther through the undergrowth, his presence parting the crowd without a single touch. As he approached, the drunken men felt the change in atmosphere. The temperature seemed to drop. They turned, their sneers faltering as they took in the sight of Julian Kang. They didn't know who he was, not exactly, but they recognized power when they saw it. It was in the cut of his suit, the lethal stillness of his posture, the chilling emptiness in his dark eyes. He stopped beside Alara, not even glancing at the men. His focus was entirely on her. He looked at the empty tray in her hands. "Are you finished here?" he asked, his voice a low baritone meant only for her. Alara was momentarily stunned. This man had appeared out of nowhere, a specter of impossible elegance and menace. His attention felt like a spotlight, hot and unnerving. She could only nod, her throat suddenly dry. He reached out and gently took the tray from her hands. His fingers brushed against hers, and a jolt, sharp and electric, shot up her arm. He handed the tray to a passing waiter without a word, his dismissal of the object, and by extension her role, absolute. Then he turned his gaze to the smirking young men. He didn't speak, he just looked at them. He held their eyes for a long, silent moment, and in that silence, they saw a glimpse of the abyss. They saw a promise of consequence so severe it was beyond their privileged comprehension. The color drained from their faces. They mumbled apologies, not to Alara, but to him, and practically fled. The space around them was suddenly quiet, an invisible circle of deference. "Thank you," Alara said, finding her voice. It came out shakier than she wanted. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Julian said, his eyes still on her. It was the most honest thing he had said all night. He felt an irrational, primal urge to keep her in his sight, to shield her from every casual cruelty the world could throw at her. "They were bothering you." "It's part of the job," she said with a hint of her usual wryness, a defense mechanism kicking in. Along with sore feet and cheap uniforms. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What is your name?" "Alara." "Alara," he repeated, tasting the name. It sounded right. "I'm Julian." He didn't offer a hand to shake. He just stood there, watching her, his intensity a force of gravity that pulled her in. She felt exposed, seen in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She should have made an excuse, walked away, and disappeared back into the shadows of the service staff. But she couldn't. She was held captive by the sheer force of his attention. "I have to get back to work," she said, the excuse sounding flimsy even to her own ears. "No," he said, not as a command, but as a simple statement of a new reality. "You're done for the night." He gestured subtly, and a man in a black suit, the event manager, materialized at his side, looking nervous. "Mr. Kang," the manager stammered, "is everything all right?" "This employee's shift is over," Julian stated, his gaze never leaving Alara. "She will be paid for the full night, plus a bonus for the inconvenience. Have my driver informed that he will be taking her home." The manager blinked, utterly confused, but too intimidated to question the order. Of course, Mr. Kang. Right away." Alara's head was spinning. "What? No, you can't do that. I can't just leave." "You can," Julian said. "And you will." He wasn't asking. He was rearranging her world with the casual ease of a man who rearranged lives for a living. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. His scent, something clean and sharp, like winter air and expensive wool, enveloping her. "I'll see you again, Alara." It wasn't a question or a hope. It was a promise. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd as if he were never there, leaving Alara standing in the sudden, echoing silence, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had no idea who he was, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her life had just irrevocably changed. The next morning, Alara woke up convinced it had been a strange, vivid dream. The impossibly handsome, menacing man, the silent, terrifying dismissal of those drunken idiots, the bewildering, chauffeured ride home in a car so luxurious it felt like a spaceship. But then she checked her bank account. The catering company had deposited her pay, just as he'd said. And a bonus. A bonus that was 5 times the amount of the shift itself.
Whoa,
Maya breathed, peering over her shoulder at the phone screen. Okay, so maybe my handsome billionaire prediction wasn't so far off. Who was this guy? What did he look like? Intense, Alara said, sinking onto the sofa. And sad. Around the eyes. He was dressed like he owned the world, but he looked like he was carrying it on his shoulders. She shook her head, trying to clear it. It was weird, Maya. The way he looked at me. It wasn't like other men. It was consuming. Consuming? Girl, that's hot, Maya said, fanning herself dramatically. Did you get his number? No, he just said he'd see me again and vanished. It was creepy. It's romantic, Maya insisted. It's like a fairy tale. The dark prince finds the beautiful commoner. I'm not beautiful, and he's not a prince, Alara muttered, though the memory of his gaze sent an unwanted shiver through her. He's just some rich guy who's used to getting his own way. She was determined to put it out of her mind. It was a fluke, a bizarre, one-time encounter. She went to her morning shift at the coffee shop, the familiar routine a comfort. She pulled shots, steamed milk, and called out names, trying to ground herself in the reality of her normal, complicated life. Around 10 o'clock, the bell over the door chimed, and a hush fell over the normally chaotic cafe. Alara looked up from the espresso machine, and her breath caught in her throat. Julian Kang was standing there. He was dressed down, if one could call a cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored trousers dressed down. He looked completely out of place, a panther in a petting zoo. People were staring, mesmerized and intimidated. He ignored them all, his eyes finding her instantly across the crowded room. He walked to the counter, the line of customers parting for him as if by magic. Hi, she stammered, her hands suddenly clumsy on the portafilter. What are you doing here? You work here, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. How did you know that? The question came out sharp, accusatory. He had the grace to look momentarily uncertain. I had someone find out. You had someone, she began, her voice rising in disbelief. Is that legal? That's stalking. This is creepy. Is it? He seemed genuinely curious, tilting his head slightly. The gesture was so at odds with his powerful aura that it threw her off balance. My apologies. My methods are direct. Direct is one word for it, she muttered, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. What do you want? A latte? A restraining order? His lips twitched again with that ghost of a smile. I want to take you to dinner. I'm working. Tonight. I'm working tonight too. Then I will buy the restaurant you work at and give you the night off, he said. He wasn't joking. The absolute seriousness in his eyes told her he was completely capable of it. Panic and a strange, thrilling excitement warred within her. This was insane. He was insane. But a part of her, the part that was tired of scraping by, the part that had felt seen for the first time in years under his intense gaze, was tempted. You can't just buy a restaurant, she said, trying to cling to logic. I can, he confirmed softly. Alara, please, just dinner. The use of her name, the quiet please from a man who probably never said it, broke through her defenses. She looked into his eyes, dark and deep and full of a loneliness that mirrored her own, and she found herself nodding. "Fine," she sighed, defeated. "One dinner." A flicker of something, relief, victory, crossed his face. "I'll have my driver pick you up at 7. He didn't order a coffee. He just turned and left, the cafe's atmosphere returning to normal in his wake, leaving Ilara with a racing heart and the dawning realization that she had just agreed to have dinner with a hurricane. The pursuit had begun. Julian was relentless, but in a way that was utterly bewildering. He didn't shower her with extravagant gifts. The one time he'd sent a mountain of flowers to her apartment, she had called him and bluntly told him it was wasteful and that she was allergic to lilies. The flowers stopped. Instead, his gestures were practical, almost invisible. One week, the ancient, rattling air conditioner in her and Maya's apartment was replaced overnight with a silent, top-of-the-line system. The landlord claimed it was a building-wide upgrade, but Maya's conspiratorial wink told Ilara everything. Another time, she mentioned in passing that her art school application needed a portfolio review. 2 days later, a personal invitation arrived from the most celebrated gallery owner in the city, offering her a private consultation. Each time, she confronted him. "You have to stop this!" And each time, he would simply reply, "Is your life not better?" It was infuriating. He was taking away her struggles, the very things that defined her resilience. But he was replacing them with an ease she couldn't deny was seductive. Their dinners became a regular occurrence. He never took her to the flashy, exclusive places she expected. Instead, they went to quiet, hidden restaurants where they could talk. And they talked. She told him about her dream of being a painter, about the frustration of her daily grind, about her mother in another state who worried constantly about her. She was sarcastic and guarded, using her wit as a shield, but he seemed to see right through it. He, in turn, was a fortress. He spoke of his family in vague, dutiful terms. He talked about his father, a man of tradition, and the immense pressure of his family business. He never lied, she realized later. He just offered a carefully curated version of the truth. He was lonely. That much was painfully clear. He spoke of his penthouse not as a home, but as a silent observation deck. "You're the first person who has ever told me no," he confessed one night, swirling the wine in his glass. "I find that hard to believe," she retorted. "People don't say no to me," he said, his gaze distant. "They say yes, Mr. Kang, or they say nothing at all. You tell me my flowers are wasteful and my methods are creepy." "They are," she insisted, but her voice was softer now. "I know," he said, a real, genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. It was like a punch to the chest, a dazzling, unexpected blow that left her breathless. "That's why I like it." She was falling for him. It was terrifying. It felt like stepping off a cliff and trusting that the wind would hold her. He was gentle with her, surprisingly so. He would listen for hours as she talked about color theory or the way light hit the buildings at dawn. He touched her as if she were made of spun glass, a stark contrast to the barely concealed power that radiated from him. One evening, he took her to a vast, empty warehouse space on the waterfront. It was derelict, filled with dust and forgotten things. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. "It's yours," he said simply. She stared at him. "What?" "It's a studio. Or it can be. It has good light." He gestured to the massive, grime-covered windows overlooking the river. "You can paint here. No rent, no time limits, just create." It was the most extravagant, most terrifying, most wonderful gift anyone had ever offered her. It was everything she had ever wanted. And it came from him. From this man who was a walking contradiction, a mystery she was becoming desperate to solve. Tears pricked her eyes. "Julian, I can't accept this." "Why not?" he asked, stepping closer. Don't you deserve a place to make your art? Don't you deserve to have your dream? It's not about deserving, she whispered, looking around the vast, potential-filled space. This is too much. I don't know who you are. The lightness in the air vanished. The shadows in the corners of the warehouse seemed to deepen. His expression became shuttered, the familiar mask of the powerful man slipping back into place. You know me, he said, his voice low. No, I don't, she insisted, her voice gaining strength. I know you're rich. I know you're powerful. I know you're lonely. But I don't know what you do, Julian. I don't know where the money for this studio comes from. People are afraid of you. I see it in their eyes. Why? Who are you? The question hung between them, heavy and dangerous. He looked at her, and she saw a war in his eyes. The desire to tell her, to be fully known by her, battled with the instinct to protect her from the truth. Just then, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face hardened into stone. It was a look she had never seen directed at her, a look of pure, cold command. I have to go, he said, his tone abrupt. Julian. Not now, Alara. He turned and strode toward the door, Minjun appearing from the shadows to flank him. The brief moment of vulnerability was gone, replaced by the king returning to his throne. The warehouse suddenly felt cold and empty. The incident unsettled her deeply. The question of who he was became a constant, nagging presence. A few days later, the first real crack in his carefully constructed world appeared. He had taken her to a small, private art exhibit. As they were leaving, a black sedan screeched to a halt in front of them. 3 grim-faced men got out, blocking their path. Before Alara could even process the threat, Minjun had moved between her and the men, his hand inside his jacket. Julian didn't even look at them. He simply put a firm, steadying hand on the small of Alara's back and guided her toward his car. Get in the car, Alara, he said, his voice dangerously calm. What's happening? She asked, her heart pounding. It's business, he said, his eyes fixed on the men. He spoke a short, sharp command in Korean. Minjun nodded. Julian opened the car door for her. Go. She got in, her hands trembling. The last thing she saw before the driver pulled away was Julian facing the men, his shoulders back, a silent, immovable object of authority. The confrontation was over before it began. The men bowed, a gesture of profound, fearful respect, and got back in their car. When he met her back at her apartment an hour later, he looked tired, the weight of the world back on his shoulders. Who were they? She demanded the moment he walked in. Competitors, he said, shrugging off his jacket. Competitors in what, Julian? What business are you in where competitors block your car on the street? His silence was her answer, and in that moment, she knew she couldn't live with the not knowing anymore. She loved him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She loved this impossible, dangerous, gentle man. And if she loved him, she had to know all of him, even the parts he kept locked away in the dark. That evening, his father, Chairman Kang, requested a meeting. Julian found him in his traditional study, a room of dark wood and the smell of old paper and ginseng. Chairman Kang was a relic, a man who believed in fear as the only true currency. I hear you have been distracted, the old man said in Korean, not looking up from his calligraphy. By a girl, a foreigner, a dark-skinned one. The disdain in his voice was palpable. Her name is Alara, Julian said, his voice cold. She is not a distraction. Anything that softens you is a distraction, his father retorted, his brush stroking a character onto the paper with violent precision. Power cannot afford softness. This family cannot afford it. Remember what happened to your uncle when he became soft. The veiled threat was clear. His uncle had fallen in love with an outsider years ago, and had met with a convenient, tragic accident. "I am not my uncle," Julian said, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "And you will not go near her." His father finally looked up, his eyes like chips of obsidian. "A weakness is a liability, and liabilities are always dealt with. End it, or I will." Julian left the meeting with ice in his veins. His father's threat solidified a terrifying truth. Loving Alara didn't just put his heart at risk, it put her life in danger. He couldn't protect her from a world she didn't understand. He couldn't keep her safe in the shadows. He had to tell her. He had to give her the truth, no matter how ugly. He had to give her the choice to save herself. He drove to her apartment, but she wasn't there. Maya told him she'd gone to the studio, the one he had given her. He found her there, standing in the middle of the vast empty space, a single easel set up in the center. She had started her first canvas. It was a portrait of him. Not the powerful Mr. Kang, but the man she saw. His eyes were full of the sadness she'd first noticed. Seeing how she saw him, broke something inside him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice rough. He couldn't do it here, in this place that represented a clean, hopeful future. He took her back to his penthouse, the glass cage in the sky, a place built by the very darkness he was about to reveal. And so he stood before her, the city glittering below, and laid his sins at her feet. "I run the Kangpe," he said, "the largest syndicate in this city, what you would call the Korean Mafia." He watched her face as the truth landed, watched the hope and love in her eyes shatter and be replaced by shock, then fear, then a profound, soul-deep hurt. "A choice to what?" she asked, her voice a weapon against her own heartbreak. "To look the other way? To be the gangster's girl who wears diamonds bought with someone else's pain?" Her words were a physical blow. He had expected anger, fear. He hadn't expected her to so perfectly articulate the very thing he hated about himself. "No," he said, the word torn from him. "A choice to leave. To run as far away from me as you can and never look back." He was offering her an escape. He was cutting out his own heart to save her. Alara looked at the man she loved, the man who was a monster and a savior all at once. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. Her principles, the very core of her identity, were at war with her heart. She had come from nothing, had fought for every scrap of integrity she owned. She could not build her happiness on a foundation of crime and violence. She couldn't paint a beautiful future with colors mixed from dirty money. "I can't," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I can't be that person, Julian. I can't be with you." She expected him to argue, to command, to use his immense power to make her stay. But he didn't. He just stood there, his face a mask of utter devastation, and nodded. The king was letting her go. "I know," he said. His voice was hollow, a dead thing. She turned and walked out of the penthouse, out of his life, without looking back. The elevator ride down was a silent descent into hell. Each floor that passed was another layer of the dream being stripped away, leaving her with the cold, hard reality. When the doors opened to the lobby, she felt like a ghost, leaving the land of the living behind. She was safe now, and she had never felt more broken. Upstairs, Julian stood at the window, watching the city lights blur through his own unshed tears. He had done the right thing. He had protected her, and in doing so, he had just destroyed himself. The silence of his perfect, empty penthouse screamed back at him. The days that followed were shades of gray. Alara quit her job at the bistro, unable to face the place where he had so often picked her up for their quiet dinners. She kept the coffee shop job, the mindless routine a small, bitter comfort. She went to the studio once, stared at the unfinished portrait of Julian, at the sadness she had captured so perfectly in his eyes, and felt a wave of grief so profound she had to leave. She locked the door and never went back. Maya tried her best. She brought home ice cream and terrible movies. She listened while Alara cried, and she held her when she had no tears left. "You did the right thing," Maya would say softly. "You have to be true to yourself, E." Ilara knew she was right. She had chosen her principles. She had chosen integrity. But her integrity felt like a cold, empty room. Every corner of the city reminded her of him. A passing car like his, a man in a well-tailored suit, the scent of winter air. She was safe from his world, but she felt no peace. The struggle for rent, the exhaustion of her daily life, it had all returned, but now it was heavier, because she knew what it felt like to have it all lifted away. She missed the struggle less than she missed the man who had tried to erase it. She missed his intensity, his quiet gentleness, the feeling of being the absolute center of someone's universe. She missed Julian. The ache of his absence was a constant physical pain in her chest. For Julian, life became a series of motions without meaning. He plunged back into the family business with a ruthlessness that startled even Minjun. He finalized the takeover of Tanaka's operations, consolidated 3 other territories, and increased the family's revenue by 30% in 2 months. He was efficient, brutal, and utterly empty. His father was pleased. "I see you have dealt with your distraction," Chairman Kang said with satisfaction. "This is who you are, my son. A king." Julian looked at his father, at the man who celebrated this soulless version of him, and felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred. This cage of power, this legacy of fear, it had cost him the only light he had ever known. "This is what you made me," Julian said, his voice lethally quiet. "It is not who I am." He walked out of his father's study, leaving the old man sputtering in shock. That night, sitting in his silent penthouse, staring at the empty space where she had stood, a decision formed in his mind. It was a radical, impossible idea. A rebellion not against his rivals, but against his own name, his own history, his own father. He had offered her a choice to leave him. Now, he would choose to become a man she wouldn't have to leave. He called Minjun to his office the next day. "We are going legitimate," he announced without preamble. Minjun, ever the pragmatist, stared at him. "Sir, what do you mean, legitimate?" "I mean, we are getting out of the business of fear," Julian said, his eyes burning with a new, terrifying purpose. "The loan sharking, the extortion, the protection rackets, all of it. We are going to liquidate the assets, pay off the liabilities, and pivot everything into the legitimate ventures. Real estate, technology, logistics. We have the capital. We have the infrastructure." "The chairman will never allow it," Minjun stated, his face grim. "The old guard, they live on that fear. They will see it as weakness. They will see you as weak. They will come for you." "I know," Julian said. "That's why you are going to help me. We are not asking for their permission. We are staging a coup, a corporate one. We will systematically cut them out, buy them out, or force them out. It will be a war, Minjun. But it will be a war fought in boardrooms and with contracts, not with knives in back alleys." Minjun was silent for a long time, processing the sheer audacity of the plan. It was suicide. But then he looked at his friend, at the hollowed-out man who had been a ghost for months, and he saw a flicker of the old fire, repurposed for a new, impossible goal. He saw the man Julian wanted to be. "For her?" Minjun asked softly. Julian's jaw tightened. He simply nodded. Minjun gave a slow, deliberate nod. His loyalty had always been to Julian, not to the syndicate. "Then we go to war." The grand gesture of change was not a single romantic act. It was a slow, brutal, and dangerous campaign. Julian worked with a feverish intensity, dismantling the criminal empire his grandfather had built and his father had maintained. He used the syndicate's own ruthless tactics against its members. He found their financial weaknesses, their hidden accounts, their secret betrayals, and used them as leverage. He offered them a choice: a generous severance to walk away clean, or total financial and social ruin. His father was incandescent with rage. He tried to rally the old guard, but Julian was always one step ahead. He had Minjun, whose loyalty was absolute, and he had a purpose that made him unstoppable. He was fighting for more than power or money. He was fighting for his soul. News of the internal war in the city's largest criminal organization began to leak. Not in the tabloids, but in the financial pages. Kang Industries announces major restructuring, the headlines read. Mysterious CEO shifts focus to tech and real estate. Elara saw one of the articles on a discarded newspaper in the coffee shop. She saw the name Kang Industries, and her heart stopped. She read the article, her coffee going cold in her hand. It spoke of a radical shift, of cutting ties with past associates, and a move toward full corporate transparency. It was corporate jargon, but she could read between the lines. He was doing it. The impossible thing. He was changing his world. For her, the thought was too audacious, too overwhelming, but it planted a seed of hope in the barren landscape of her heart. The war took 6 months. Julian barely slept. He survived on coffee and sheer willpower. He lost 20 pounds. There were threats. A car bomb discovered by Minjun's team outside his office. A failed ambush. But he never wavered. He dismantled the darkness piece by piece. Finally, it was done. The old guard was broken, scattered, or bought out. His father was left a figurehead, a man with a title but no power, relegated to his study and his calligraphy, a ghost in a house that no longer obeyed him. Kang Industries was, on paper and in practice, a legitimate global corporation. The foundation was still built on old, dirty money, a fact Julian would have to live with forever, but the structure rising from it was clean. He stood in his penthouse, looking out at the city. He was still a king, but his kingdom was different. He had shed his old skin. He was bruised, exhausted, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a lifetime. He felt worthy. He drove himself, not in the black, bulletproof sedan, but in a simple, anonymous car. He didn't have Minjun find her. He knew where she would be. He parked across the street from the coffee shop and waited. At the end of her shift, she emerged, looking just as tired as he remembered, but still so beautiful it stole his breath. She pulled her thin coat tighter against the evening chill and started walking toward the subway. Elara! She froze at the sound of his voice. She turned slowly, her eyes wide. He stood there, on a simple city street, looking thinner, more weary, but his eyes. The sadness was still there, but it was joined by something new, a quiet, desperate hope. She walked toward him, her feet moving of their own accord. Julian. It's done, he said, his voice raw. The old business. It's gone. I changed it. It's clean now. As clean as I could make it. He wasn't boasting. It was a confession, an offering. I know it's not enough. I know the past doesn't just wash away. But I had to. I had to try. To be a man that you... She cut him off by surging forward and kissing him. It wasn't a soft, tentative kiss. It was a collision. A desperate, frantic press of lips and teeth and soul. It was 6 months of misery and longing and heartbreak poured into a single explosive moment. Her arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him down to her, and his arms came around her waist, lifting her off her feet, holding her against him as if he could absorb her into himself. It was a kiss of forgiveness and reunion, A promise made on a cold city sidewalk. It tasted of coffee and tears and second chances. When they finally broke apart, breathless, they just held each other. "You're an idiot," she whispered into his chest, her voice thick with tears. "A crazy, reckless, wonderful idiot." "I know," he murmured into her hair, his voice choked with emotion. He held her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "I'm not a good man, Alara. I never will be, but I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be a good man for you." "You don't have to be good for me," she said, looking up at him, her eyes shining. "You just have to be mine." He lowered his head and kissed her again, slower this time. A kiss that was not an ending, but a beginning. The beginning of a difficult, complicated, and beautiful future. 2 years later, the waterfront warehouse was no longer derelict. Its massive windows were clean, flooding the vast space with light. The brick walls were covered with enormous canvases, vibrant explosions of color and emotion. It was Ilara's studio, but it was also her gallery. Her first solo show had sold out in an hour. She was no longer Ilara Vance, the struggling waitress. She was Ilara Vance Kang, one of the city's most exciting new artistic voices. Julian stood near the entrance, watching her talk to a critic. He never hovered, but he was always there, a quiet, supportive presence. He was still the CEO of Kang Industries, a powerful and respected figure in the global business community. The whispers about his family's past had faded, replaced by talk of his philanthropy and his shrewd investments in green technology. The darkness was still a part of his history, a scar on his soul, but it no longer defined his present. Ilara caught his eye from across the room and gave him a small, secret smile. The sight of it still hit him like a punch to the chest, but now it was a welcome blow, a reminder of the life they had built from the ashes of his old one. Later that night, they stood on the balcony of their home, not the sterile penthouse, but a warm, sprawling brownstone they had renovated together. It was filled with art and books and life. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they looked out at the quiet, tree-lined street. She leaned back against him, her hand covering his. "More than I ever thought possible." She turned in his arms to face him. "Do you ever miss it? The power, the fear?" He considered the question honestly. "I miss the simplicity," he admitted, "knowing exactly who your enemies are. Now my enemies are quarterly reports and market fluctuations." A real, easy smile touched his lips. "But I was a king in an empty castle, Ilara. You gave me a home." He kissed her, a deep, familiar kiss full of the quiet security of their shared life. The kingpin had been redeemed, not by erasing his past, but by building a better future. And the resilient heart had found a love that was not only safe, but empowering. They had saved each other. Together, they had found that redemption isn't about becoming perfect. It's about finding a love that is strong enough to hold all of your broken pieces together and call them beautiful. This story is a testament to the idea that love's true power lies not in ignoring the darkness in others, but in inspiring them to find their own light. It suggests that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to fight for it, and that true strength is not the power to control others, but the courage to change oneself for the better. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. It's a powerful reminder that our past does not have to define our future, and that the choices we make for love can lead to our greatest transformations. Thank you for joining us for this dramatic romance. If this story moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more content like this, and sharing it with someone who loves a story about redemption and second chances. What did you think of Julian's grand gesture? Was it a realistic path to redemption? Or was Ilara right to be hesitant? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. For our next story, we'd love your input. Would you like to see A, A story about Minjun, the loyal second-in-command, finding an unexpected love of his own while navigating the new, legitimate Kang Industries? B. A prequel story about Julian's father, Chairman Kang, showing how he rose to power and what made him the ruthless man he is. Vote A or B in the comments, and we'll see you in the next story.